I just want to welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us tonight on behalf of Elite Athlete Services, the JPHL and HSL. We just want to welcome you to some of the sessions that we're providing this year. And today we're going to focus on mental health and mental performance. So I'm just going to share my slides here, make sure that that's all good. Start the presentation. Okay. That look good to you, Cody?
Yeah.
All right, very good. Well, again, welcome everybody, and thank you for taking the time for being with us tonight. Here's a little bit about us and Elite Athlete Services. I'm very privileged to work with some stellar individuals, and really our goal and interest is to work with young athletes, to develop young athletes so everybody can reach their performance and reach their optimal potential. Here's just a little bit about me. I've had the privilege of working with athletes. I wanted to be a professional hockey player, if I'm going to be honest. I grew up in Montreal and dreamed of playing professional hockey. Problem was, I wasn't very good. So I went the academic route, and over time, I specialized in clinical neuropsychology. I was very interested in how the brain works, and that aligned with some of the interests in terms of working with athletes and sport concussions. Maybe some of you have had a concussion or know of somebody that's had a concussion. That's become a very important topic. And in the last number of years, I've specialized in athlete performance. So I have the real privilege of consulting with the Oilers. We had an incredible year last year, and this year we're going to take it to the promised land. Also have the privilege of consulting with the Canadian Football League and with the University of Alberta. So there's a lot to talking about mental health and mental performance. And so I'm really pleased that you've come tonight and taken some time out of your evening to do that. And so here's what we're going to look at doing tonight. It's just talking a little bit about the why, the where, and what of mental health. We're going to talk about brain health and then being prepared in the mental performance aspect. So when we think of the amount of time that the average person puts into hockey, I don't know how many hours you've already put in this week and how many you expect to be putting in. I think there's a few days of holiday this week, but I'm sure many of you are going to put many hours. And so if we put all those hours together over the course of your young playing career, that's about 5,000 hours that you're going to be putting into the sport if we average 10 hours a week. And some of you are probably going to average a lot more. What are the costs? Well, I'm sure your parents know this very well, that it's not cheap, but it's an investment. And so you want to make sure that that investment is working for you. So that means that there's obviously a lot of money that goes into just paying for minor hockey, the skates, the equipment, the travel, all those kind of things. But you do it because you love it. So that's great. It's obviously something that you're passionate about, and what Canadian kid doesn't want to play hockey? So one of the questions we like to ask is, so what is your mental performance plan? All the time that you've spent preparing yourself in the gym, on the ice, on the dry land training, what about the mental side of things? And I'm sure some of you have really dialed into that. Maybe some of your teams have access to some mental performance or psychologists. But the question is, what is your mental performance plan? Because as leagues and as the players you play against become more competitive, just means what is the differentiating factor and what are the things that are going to help you? And so it's an important question because there's a lot more talk these days about mental performance and the mental side of things, and also about mental health than there ever has been in the past. So this often leads to questions, well, what is mental performance? What do I have to do? What are the things that other people are doing? What are the professional players doing? And I'm going to share some of that with you tonight. And so again, some of you may have further questions about mental performance, about psychology, about sports psychology. You may have some interest in that. And I certainly think it's worthwhile your time. I always like to start with the question of what's your dream? Is it to get drafted? Is it to play in college? Is it to play in the NHL? Is it to hoist the Stanley Cup above your head? That sounds pretty good to me. But what is your dream? Why are you playing hockey right now? And what is your ultimate goal? And I like what Sidney Crosby says, that all of you right now, you want to have big goals. Not just any goal, but you want to have big goals so you're able to reach those goals. And that's really what these seminars are about. And that's what our organization is about, is really helping athletes achieve their goals. So I'm going to begin with a conversation and just talking a little bit about mental health. Now, mental health is something that I'm sure most of us have heard about. And the question is, why would you take on a Tuesday night some time to learn about mental health? Well, the reality is that these days, there's more conversations. There's Bell Let's Talk. There's been a number of professional athletes that have gone public talking about their mental health. And maybe some of you have experienced some of that where you felt really anxious, or maybe you've been struggling in your game and you feel down, you feel discouraged, you feel like you're not reaching your goals, you feel like things are not going well. Or in some cases, I've had the privilege of working with some athletes that have had a really tough time in life. They have a lot of complications at home, a lot of stress in the home, and hockey or sports is the one thing that allows them to focus, to be distracted from all those other things. And so that's important to talk about, is that it's not just about you performing on the ice, it's about you as a person. And so when we think of, well, what is mental health, you can see your textbook definition is a condition of being mentally and emotionally sound that's characterized by the absence of mental illness and adequate adjustment. As an athlete, you sure have a lot of things that you have to adjust to, right? You have other competition, you have just your own self to deal with, you have busy school lives, you have lots of things going on for you. So how do you mentally prepare? And maybe you got up one day and you're just spent and you go to class and you're tired and it's hard for you to even focus. Or maybe you've gone to the rink and you want to play, but you're just not in the right mindset, or you're feeling tired or feeling discouraged. Well, being mentally healthy is being prepared to meet those demands. Now, some of the things that I think are important to note is that athletes, while they also have many advantages in playing sports and being physically active is hugely important, the rates of mental health are quite comparable between elite athletes and the general population. And that may be surprising to hear. And again, I've had the privilege of working at all levels of sport, and I will tell you that there are an equally high number of athletes that have struggled, and we're starting to hear the narratives of some of those people. Now, why is that? What are some of the reasons why some people may struggle with mental health and others do not? Well, there's genetics, all right? There's family history, experiencing negative life events. So again, stress in the family can be one of them. Not having a lot of social support, poor sleep habits, and then with an athlete, injuries. Hopefully none of you have had any serious injuries, but they happen. And when that happens, that can be a weight. It can be a psychological weight. Performance failure, overtraining. You ever do that? You ever train too much? You ever feel like you're burning out? Well, all those factors can contribute to poor mental health. And as I said before, we're seeing a lot more conversation at all levels of sport. And that's why we feel we're really privileged to work with the HSL and the JPHL to talk about a subject that may be not the easiest or most fun to talk about. But it is something that I have found to be very important. And you can see some of the headlines of some of the athletes that have gone public with that. I think Carey Price's comment, where he talks about he's working through some of the mental health issues. And what he's telling us is that he didn't address things when he should have. And I think that's why you being here tonight and you being engaged in conversations about mental health, well, I think that's a good thing, because we don't want to be in a situation like Carey Price was, where years later, everything caught up to him and it led to some significant issues. Okay, I just want to talk to you a little bit about what it is. And maybe you wondered yourself about, I'm anxious, does that make a mental health condition? What does that mean? A couple of important points that I want you to think about when it comes to being a healthy athlete. One of them is being successful does not automatically mean that you're healthy. Of course, we all dream of winning a championship. We all dream of winning the Stanley Cup. But if you ask a lot of athletes who have had that kind of success, they'll tell you that success doesn't always mean that you're healthy. In fact, sometimes it can be the opposite. Everything we're learning is that mental health and brain health, so how you take care of your brain, how you take care of your body, has a lot to do with mental health. There's a lot of demands on young athletes these days. Sleep, nutrition, training, competition, all those things. And how's your body and how's your brain doing with that? And again, the ultimate goal is that the better place that you're in from a mental perspective, the more likely you're going to perform at your highest. And I'm sure all of you can think of a time, maybe in the last week or two, where you're dialed in, where you're feeling good, where you're feeling confident. And what happens there? Well, you end up playing at a much higher level. And that's a great thing. And that's what you want. The stats, as I said, are somewhat surprising, but important to think about. About 25% of the normal population experiences depression at some point in their life. When we look at professional athletes, so these are studies of professional football players and hockey players, when they're retired, most of them, about 50% of them, will talk about having mental health challenges during their playing careers. So when I'm giving this presentation in person, I often have people just look to their left, look to their right. And it's likely that one of those three people that you're surrounding may have experienced some type of mental health issue. And being a good teammate, understanding what they're going through, well, that's a good thing. Or maybe you've experienced some of that and you're wondering, what do I do? And that's what we want to talk about. So when it comes to athletes, and I think it's really important for me to mention that when it comes to conversations about mental health, athletes have unique challenges. Athlete mental health, in my opinion, is a little different because of the unique pressures in sports, because of the competition, because of the high risk of injury, because of the pressure to perform. All those type of things can lead to more significant mental health concerns. But athletes are also very resilient. They've learned to manage stress. You ever feel stressed when you're on the ice? You ever feel worried about something? You ever feel down or discouraged? Well, those are common for athletes. Everybody has to deal with those kind of things at some point in their career. And so when we look at the common diagnosable conditions, you can see depression. That's where you feel low, where your mood is down, where you feel discouraged and hopeless. Bipolar disorder is a condition where you fluctuate between overactivated, so you're euphoric, you don't sleep, your mind is racing, and then you go into a depression, or what we call an adjustment disorder. Have you ever had a bad experience? For example, you lost a parent, lost a loved one, breakup of a relationship, something like that, and you're not coping very well. It just seems things are not going well for you. And no matter how you try, you're feeling down, you're feeling anxious, you're feeling depressed. Well, that's what we call an adjustment disorder. And this is not uncommon for athletes, because think of all the potential disappointments that you feel, not making a team when you expected to, having an injury, all those kind of things. And so it's important to recognize that your moods can fluctuate based on the circumstances around you. Again, anxiety, or feel stressed, or feel a little anxious. We have a much higher percentage of athletes who have attention disorders. That's because sports can be a very helpful environment for actually focusing your brain. If you've ever had a concussion, there can be changes in your mood. And then we have athletes that deal with some pretty difficult things. I've had the privilege of walking on some tough roads with some of the athletes that have dealt with trauma. So they've dealt with abuse inside of their sport or outside of their sport. It's been, of course, a lot of public discussions from Theo Fleury, Sheldon Kennedy, all those individuals that have experienced the really unfortunate consequences of trauma in the context of sport. And I think it's important that we understand and recognize that. And then you can see that if you have a catastrophic injury, then what about substance use? How many people have ever used marijuana for whatever context? What does that look like? And maybe you become dependent on that. Or alcohol is something that helps us regulate in the short term, but creates longer term issues. And it's not uncommon. Studies of professional athletes suggest that over 50% of them have struggled with abusing substances at some point in their career. So this is why it's important that we want to be open. We want to have conversations about these things to prepare you as an athlete, to support you as an athlete if you're ever walking through some of these things. Another important point that I'd like to just really emphasize is why are we talking about this? What's the importance of this? One of my colleagues in Sweden, Dr. Urban Johnson, has done a lot of important research looking at the fact that when somebody is mentally in a bad mental place, when they're stressed or they're experiencing prolonged injury, we see that there's a high incidence of physical injuries. I don't know what injuries you might have had. Maybe it's a sprained ankle, maybe it's a sprained finger, maybe it's a broken finger, or maybe something more serious like a shoulder injury, or hopefully not a reconstructed knee. but there's a lot of injuries that can happen. One of the things that we've understood is that when athletes are under stress, they are much more likely to get injured. Nobody wants to be in the rehab room. We want to be on the ice. And yet, when you're in a situation where you're experiencing a high level of stress in your life, it makes the body, it makes the mind, and it makes you more vulnerable to the impact of injuries. And so you can see here, this is just a quick overview that of all the factors that predict injury. So that's the ice conditions, that's your training, all those kind of things. The factor that most predicts or that's most likely to be related to an injury that accounts for most of the variance is stress. So when athletes are under stress, it leaves them to a much greater extent when they're vulnerable to injury. And I've seen this many times. This past year in football, we had an athlete who came, and one of his family members was in a car accident the day before training camp, and he was really stressed. And you could tell that he was really bothered by it. And it was rather interesting that a day later in camp, he suddenly has an injury. And I think it was because he had a lot of stress going on. So that's why thinking about managing stress, productive strategies, dealing with mental health issues when they come up, what's really important for you. It's really helpful to know that when you deal with those things, you're actually decreasing your incidence of injury. So a couple of things that I really want you to keep in mind here. Mental health is focused on your well-being. You being in a good place allows you to be most successful. Athletes face unique circumstances that can build character, but also can burden mental health at times. So again, your situation, the stress that you experience may lead to that. A lot of times it doesn't, but in some cases it does. And that's where we want you to be equipped. We want you to be educated. We've learned a lot about concussion management, and I think we're learning a lot about how to manage the psychological side of things. Understanding about how your psychological makeup affects your performance. Some of you, you're very emotional players. You play your best when you're playing with an emotional edge, when you're angry, when you're upset, when you're frustrated. Other people, it's the opposite. You play your best when you're calm, when you're feeling together. Well, it's really important to know how your emotional functioning affects your performance. And when you're being too hot, when you're too high or you're too low, all those things can have an impact. You ever had a bad shift? You ever had a bad giveaway? You ever made a mistake and everybody on the bench is looking at you? Well, how do you deal with that? What is the best way to cope with that so it doesn't weigh you down? And that's why it's important to talk about all these strategies related to mental health. So I love this quote from Wayne Gretzky. It says 90% of mental health is 90% of hockey is mental health and the other half is physical. What is he getting at? He's clearly talking about the mental side of things. And again, as you athletes are getting higher and higher and playing at more competitive levels, it's often the mental side of things that will help differentiate you. And so here's some of the things that we like to focus on when it comes to a plan. If you're looking for a map, if you ever want to get somewhere and you want to know, well, what do I have to work on when it comes to the mental side of things? The acronym that I use is FIRST, easy to remember, something that we all aspire to, but it stands for what you can see on the screen there. Focus, identity, resilience, satisfaction and well-being, and transition. If you're taking care of those different areas in your life, and as you're playing sports, it'll likely mean that you're in a good standing and prepare. And when we look at athletes that are trying to get to that next level, you have to be focused. You have to be able to concentrate. You have to be dialed in. You have to be able to know how to prepare your mind for the next level. Your identity and knowing who you are and the things that you're good at, your strengths, your weaknesses, how your personality works, that's absolutely huge when it comes to being able to perform at your best. Being a role player, what kind of role player are you? Are you a captain in the team? Are you an emotional leader? Are you a strong silent type? All those things play a big role in how you stand out among your peers. Resilience. That's you can see the definition there is but maintaining optimal performance and overcoming adversity. Absolutely huge. Athletes that are resilient. And we have many great stories of athletes that have been resilient and overcome adversity. I would say that the majority of athletes that I work with haven't had it easy. In fact, they've had it really difficult. And that doesn't mean that you can't overcome. And in fact, for some of the athletes, that's been their motivation. And a number of the players that I work with, that's exactly what they've done is they've had to overcome a lot of adversity in their life. And that's been a good thing, but it's not easy. And there's different ways to go through it. Just want to talk to you a little bit about one of the things or some of the things that can be very helpful for focus. So when it comes to focus, what does it mean to you? What helps you to stay focused? What helps you to what doesn't help you? But being able to dial in to be focused and you kind of know this mental state of when you're focused and how that can be helpful for you. In a day and age where everybody has this thing right here, which is a phone that allows you, the stats are not are quite compelling. The average 13 to 18-year-old will spend about 6 hours a day on their phones, and if we calculate that over a number of years, that's in the range of approximately about 25 years. If you make it to the age of 75, that's a lot of time that you're spending on your phone. Again, hard to deal with that. I'm not criticizing it. I'm just saying that that can really derail your focus. So here's a couple things that can be really helpful. Again, I'm just giving you a brief overview of how these can be helpful for athletes. These are some of the strategies. These are some of the trends that we're seeing with athletes. Breathing, mindfulness, and managing distraction. So what does it mean to breathe? Well, mindfulness is a product of effective breathing. Now, it may seem strange to say, well, all I have to do is inhale a breath and let it out, and that's all there is to breathing. However, we've learned that the chemistry in the brain is so tied to how we breathe. Your motivation, your emotional state is very tied to how quickly you're breathing. If you've ever been panicked, if you've ever been frightened by something, if you're hiking in the woods and a bear comes out at you, you know that the instant reaction for you is to breathe very quickly, to inhale and exhale. The other side of that is to be relaxed. You cannot be breathing quickly and be relaxed. And that's why activities like mindfulness, prayer, meditation, which is a practice, it's a skill. It's not easy to just sit there with your thoughts, but it's allowing and really being concentrating on what's going through your mind, not responding to things in the external world, but really training your mind to be present in the moment. This is a skill that you can see there's a number of athletes that have really embraced this. And I can give you a lot of science that tells you just by engaging in mindfulness practices for a few minutes a day can be extremely helpful to regulating your mood state. And I would encourage anybody to really think about mindfulness, especially if you're anxious, especially if you're prone to getting emotional. Those are strategies that can be very, very helpful for you. The other thing is distraction. So my question to you is, what are you doing to manage the distraction in your day-to-day activities? And here's some of the science behind it, which is kind of interesting, is a lot of us, when we're asked, are we effective multitaskers? The majority of people said, yeah, I can look at my phone and have a conversation. I can do a lot of things at the same time. The reality is that only 1% of the population can actually effectively multitask. The thing that's interesting is that when we ask people, can you do multiple things at the same time, like using your phone and something else, the majority of people will say, yeah, I can accomplish that just as effective as if I'm working on a singular task. The reality is that it's, when we put them in brain scanners and have them do multitasking activities, the individuals that are doing that make more mistakes and take longer to accomplish what they're trying to do. And yet they rate their level of accomplishment as higher. That's a psychological twist, is when you're texting and doing something else, when you're doing a lot of things, multitasking at the same time, psychologically, it's rewarding. The problem is you make mistakes. There's been an interesting study where they even just took a black box and they put it on a desk and they looked at how adolescents engaged in learning and memory tasks. And what they found is that just having a black box, not an actual phone, decreased memory by about 20%. It's a distraction. So the question for you is, how are you managing that distraction? How are you dealing with the things that grab your attention? And so what I ask athletes, again, is what I think is really helpful to you is, what is your pregame routine? And how does your pregame routine help minimize distraction so you can focus on the game. Again, the recommendation is 30 minutes before a game, what are you doing that's helping you dial into what you want to be doing? For some of you, talking with others is actually really helpful. It allows you to think about and process what's going on. For other athletes, actually being quiet, being away from distraction is important. But what is your routine? Is it helping you to dial in? Is it helping you to stay focused? Is allowing you to do the things that you do? Again, it's very interesting that there's a lot of variability in what helps people get focused, but that's where, again, your habits, your practices are really important. And I encourage anybody to really think through that. We know that there's difference in personality types and how people can get focused. Extroverts tend to get focused when they're talking to others, where introverts are able to focus better when they're not. Again, what are your distractions? What are the traps that are affecting your ability to focus on the game? What are the 2 or 3 things that you want to work on in the game? And what are the things that distract you from doing that? Second part of this is just the resilience piece. And just to briefly review, every athlete needs to think about building a plan for resilience. Because I promise you that there will be some times that things don't go well. And so how do you handle that? How do you manage that? And here's a great quote about confidence and building resilience is having confidence in your hockey ability and then being tough enough to follow through until you reach your goals. I really like that quote because it really talks about that resilience piece, being mentally tough enough in order to handle that. And so you can see that when athletes are resilient, when they're feeling confident, they're more likely to do more things. It's a progressive expansion of the things that they feel they can do. You're more willing to take risks. In the last game that you played, did you take a risk? Did you do some things in order to play with your edge? Or were you more timid? Were you more scared? Were you afraid of making a mistake? It's really important to think about how you're addressing every game and every practice. What are the things that allow you to take a risk, to allow you to be more aggressive in competition? And again, the 80% rule is engaging in an activity 80% of the time successfully that allows you to, and when you're successful 80% of the times, when you're practicing a skill 80% of the times, it's going to allow you to function more highly. Second thing is, how do you deal with the negative thoughts? How do you deal with the negative feelings? How many of you would consider yourself to be overthinkers? That means you hear a comment, you make a mistake, and right away, the thoughts are going through your head where you're just thinking about, oh, I shouldn't have done that. Why did I do that? I'm such an idiot. Boy, I hope I don't make that mistake again. That negative thinking is something that can happen very automatically with a lot of athletes. So the question is, if you are prone to overthinking, how do you deal with that? What are the mental states that allow you to deal with that anxiety in a productive way? And that can be finding joy and excitement. If you're finding yourself overly negative, then really dialing into what is the reason you're playing sport. What are the enjoyable parts of it? What do you really enjoy about playing that? Relaxed, again, that's the mindfulness meditation. What are the mental states that are incompatible with being negative? And that's really important about it. And so part of that is what we call the reframe. If you've ever had a bad shift, you've had a bad period, or you've made a big mistake, how do you deal with that? And the reframe comes from acknowledging the emotional state, which is, oh man, I'm really frustrated right now. I'm really angry with that. And then changing that narrative to I've got this. And I can't emphasize enough that this is important. If you want to stop yourself from going down a real negative pathway where failure becomes a bigger thing for you, where you're more and more worried about your performance, learning how to reframe the emotions and the thought processes is a skill. And it's something that you often need the help of a psychologist to work through. But this is really important. We've seen some of our professional athletes really dive into this. They have to learn how to reframe because otherwise the negativity can get a part of them. Last thing is, as I asked you at the start of the session, what is your dream? Well, what are the big moments that you are thinking of the season? What are the moments that you have planned? And what do you want? And the question is how prepared are you for that moment? How prepared are you to have the puck on your stick where you want that puck? You want to be the player that's ready to go. Jason Campo is our CEO. He scored the winning goal for UNBC, University of Nova Scotia, back years ago when he was playing junior hockey. And he tells me that he was ready for that moment well before it happened. He visioned it. He saw it in his mind. He was prepared for it. It didn't just happen. And so this is a big question is, what are you doing to prepare yourself mentally for that big moment? Because I think it's a big thing. We all want to be in that moment, but how well are you prepared for it? So I hope that's been helpful for you, just to give you a few things to think about when it comes to mental health and mental wellness. Again, it's my privilege to work with athletes, and we've seen a lot of talk about mental health, and it's really important to understand what it is. And maybe some of you have struggled with mental health in the short term or in the long term, but it's really important to know what that is. And then again, we've talked about a few things that are helpful to push back against the challenges that athletes face in terms of focus, management, resilience, and building confidence. So that's the talk for now. Again, thank you for the privilege of coming this evening. And I'm going to just stop sharing my slides and see if there's any questions that people might have.